Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A discussion with David Liu, Wall Street Warrior, a virtual professional development event hosted by the Coalition of Asian and Pacific Islander Employees of Santa Monica, or short for CAPE-SM. My name is Yvonne Young. I'm the Resource Recovery and Recycling Administrator from the Public Works Department, and I'm also the Professional Development Committee Lead for CAPE-SM. So first, for those of you who are unfamiliar with CAPE-SM, allow me to tell you a little bit about it. About 6 months ago, a small group of Asian American employees from the city, myself included, started having conversations around AAPI hate incidents and attacks around the country, heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term AAPI, it stands for Asian American Pacific Islanders, or AAPI. We wanted to do something to celebrate, educate, and advocate for AAPI cultures, develop mentorship and professional development opportunities, and create strong alliances that support the work of fellow affinity groups. So those conversations led to a listening session, a community discussion, a series of virtual events to celebrate AAPI Heritage Month, blog posts and video contents created by AAPI employees in the city, a city council proclamation, and ultimately the formation of the Coalition of Asian and Pacific Islander Employees of Santa Monica, or short for CAPE-SM. We're able to accomplish all of the above in a matter of 6 short months, so I think we all have a lot to be proud of. According to data released by HR on the social justice website, AAPI employees represent about 7 to 8% of the total City of Santa Monica workforce, or over 100 employees. We're a small but active group. We support and lift each other up, and we do fun things like virtual coffee breaks, professional development events like the one we're hosting today, and we have a book club event coming up on October 21st. We'll be reading George Takei's graphic memoir named They Called Us Enemy. It's a graphic novel, so lots of pictures, just like a comic book. Should be a lot of fun. So if any of this sounds good to you, be sure to check out CAPE-SM's SharePoint site, become a member, and sign up for the book club coming up on October 21st. We would love to have you. We'll be putting CAPE-SM's SharePoint link in the chat, so be sure to check it out. So a couple of housekeeping items for today's event. This event will be recorded and publicly available online. We'll introduce today's moderator and speaker in a second. Between now to about 1 p.m., we'll be hearing more about our speaker story. He'll answer some questions that were pre-submitted by our members, and we'll also throw a couple of polls up on the screen. If you would like to ask a question at any time, please click on the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen and type in your questions there. Again, feel free to type in any comments in the chat tab at any time, but put all of your questions for Dave in the Q&A tab. Now, you can view the questions in the Q&A tab and like or upvote any questions asked by your fellow audience members. I'll be monitoring the questions in the Q&A tab, and at about 1 o'clock, I'll be asking Dave the questions that you submitted live during this event. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the moderator for today's event, City Librarian Patty Wong. Today is actually Patty's last week with the City of Santa Monica, so we are incredibly honored that she agreed to moderate today's event as her parting gift for us. Patty Wong was born and raised in San Francisco, and she's a Chinese American and a fourth-generation Californian. She earned her bachelor's degree in women's studies and master's in library science degree from UC Berkeley. Patty began her career as a children's librarian at the Oakland Public Library and moved up the career ladder working for institutions such as the Oakland Unified School District, Berkeley Public Library, Stockton San Joaquin County Public Library, Yolo County Library System, and our very own Santa Monica Public Library. Patty has been president for the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. She is a part-time faculty member at the San Jose State University iSchool and is currently president of the American Library Association, or ALA, the very first Asian American to hold this position. Because of these accomplishments, Patty was selected as the 5th State Senate District's Woman of the Year in 2009 for improving library access, and she earned the ALA Equality Award in 2012 for her work on diversity issues at the California State Library and mentorship of students at San Jose State University. So with that, I present our moderator, city librarian, and the next city librarian for the city of Santa Clara, Patty Wong. Patty, take it away.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. My name is Patty Wong, and I'll be your moderator for today's event, and very honored to do so. Our guest speaker also comes from the Bay Area. Dave Liu is a 30-year veteran of corporate America who worked his way up to the executive level in numerous fields, including investment banking and technology. Just some of the companies he worked at are Goldman Sachs and Jefferies & Company. He's also founded companies in tech, media, and investing. His decades of experience allow him to connect with professionals at all levels of their career. A graduate of Harvard Business School and the University of Pennsylvania, Dave manages his own freelances as a staff writer for Asian Am News, where his career advice blog, Breaking Bamboo, and Cartoon Strip. The ABC, or American-Born Chinese Life, are regular features. Dave also wrote a humorous career book titled The Way of the Wall Street Warrior, Conquer the Corporate Game Using Tips, Tricks, and Smart Cuts, that is being published by Wiley and comes out in November, and we can't wait to see it. All proceeds will go toward charities and children born with clefts, Asian Americans, and other disadvantaged groups. We'll put Dave's website in the chat, so be sure to check it out. With that, I present Dave Liu. Dave, as we start today, and thank you so much for honoring us with your talents and your skills today. And I can't think of a better person to start us off with this first series. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So thanks again, Patty, for moderating, and thanks all of you for giving me this opportunity to tell you a little bit about my story and share some of what I've learned over the 30 years that I've worked in corporate America. So a little bit about myself. So I was born in the U.S., but I actually grew up in Hong Kong during the 1970s and 1980s. And it was really a great time to be there because it was kind of the whole rise of Hong Kong as an Asian tiger. So for those of you that may have spent some time in mainland China in the last, a couple decades, that's what I grew up in, where we were seeing skyscrapers go up almost daily, almost weekly. And so that was the environment in which, I spent my childhood. I went to British schools, which was also quite interesting because I grew up in an environment where I represented the majority. The majority of people look like me. And so I didn't really know what it felt like to be in a minority, until I came to this country to study and work. And I came to the U.S. To start my undergraduate. So I studied engineering and business at the University of Pennsylvania. And then I went to Wall Street. There I started at the entry level, what I joke, the janitor level at Jefferies & Company. And then I rose up the ranks to ultimately become co-head and managing director running all of the internet and digital media group for the firm for almost a decade. And during that time, during my tenure there, which was almost 25 years, I worked on billions of dollars of transactions for a lot of tech companies that are household names today. Worked on deals for companies like Google and Microsoft and Yahoo, Yelp, and pretty much did every kind of transaction imaginable, from securitizations to IPOs to M&A, so a whole variety of different things. And then in my early 40s, I decided to exit stage right or exit stage left, depending on which way you exit the stage. And I decided to become an entrepreneur. So I became an entrepreneur here in Silicon Valley, and started a variety of different companies in technology, asset management, and media, and also invested in a lot of companies. And I had the opportunity and luck, frankly, to back a lot of companies that are now in the unicorn or multi-billion-dollar value stage. As you mentioned, in my spare time, I also create content. I've always wanted to be a cartoonist ever since I was a young boy, and so now I have the liberty to spend time doing that. And so I created the comic strip called the ABC Life, which is on Asia Am News. And I also write a career column, a little bit like a Dear Abby for Asian Americans, on Asia Am News called Breaking Bamboo, where I answer a couple questions from the community and try to give back and give some advice on what has worked well for me or for, frankly, the hundreds or thousands of people that have worked for me over my career. And obviously, I've decided to also write a book. And this book is really a distillation of all the tips and tricks that I use to get ahead and get to the top and break through the bamboo ceiling. I have a wonderful family. I actually married a girl I met when I was 5 years old. We didn't get married at 5 years old, but I met her when we were 5. And so I've known her longer than everyone except for my siblings. And I have 2 wonderful boys here in the Bay Area, and we put them in Chinese immersion school because I feel very strongly that I want them to grow up with a very strong Chinese American heritage. So in summary, I've had a long, in many ways, fortunate career on Wall Street, in Silicon Valley, and now a little bit in entertainment and content. And I've had the opportunity to be not only an advisor, entrepreneur, but also author and a cartoonist. So I like to say I'm a dabbler because I've dabbled in lots of different things and continue to do so even now at this stage of my life.
Thanks, Dave. So much of what you said, I think, resonates with our audience today, but some new to us. Can you describe for us the reference to bamboo ceiling, maybe minority, also might come in there, to you, and how they affect API employees?
Yeah. So so let me take each of those one by one. So the bamboo ceiling, is essentially a term that was coined by the author Jane Hyun about 15 and a half years, more than 15 years ago, that refers to essentially the combination of factors that impede Asian Americans' career progress, within an organization. Effectively, it stunts their growth. And I believe that it exists in every organization and is a key part of the fabric of corporate America. And in fact, I think that ceilings exist in every company everywhere around the world, frankly, if you are not part of the majority, if you are not part of the majority ethnic group or gender group that controls that company. If you are part of the majority, then I don't think you have this ceiling, because in fact, I think you're kind of in the HOV lane, the fast lane, because I think when you're part of the majority, I think one of the big things that you have that others don't is you're given the benefit of the doubt. And I think it's due to things like affinity bias, or that unconscious tendency for us to get along or even forgive people who are like us or look like us. And it's easy to socialize and spend time with people who aren't different. It takes a lot more effort to bridge the differences when diversity is present. And so I think being different hurts the minority. And I think in particular, AAPI employees, because let's face it, my face is not necessarily the face of someone that mainstream America associates with America. In fact, given a lot of the things that are going on in the political discourse today, you could argue that I have the face of the enemy. And so I think it's very challenging for Asian Americans in particular to crack through effectively this bamboo ceiling. I also think that an additional challenge is the model minority myth. This is a term that was coined more than half a century ago by the New York Times, of all places, where the author stated that things related to family and cultural emphasis on hard work allowed at the time, Japanese Americans to overcome discrimination and still be successful. And in many ways, that model minority myth has become really pervasive among all Asian Americans by non-Asians, where I think there's a perception that all Asian Americans are hardworking and don't need any help, and they're all successful, and so if they're successful, then so should you, Mr. Minority. And so I think the model minority myth has become so ingrained in American culture, where non-Asians view us, Asian Americans, as a monolithic group that is hardworking, book smart, doesn't need any help, because frankly, we overachieve. And it is a myth, and I think the myth element of it is absolutely true. It's a myth because, let's face it, Asian Americans are the least likely group to be promoted. And this is not just, our perception. This is validated by, Harvard Business School. Harvard Business School actually came out with a research report in 2018, so not too long ago, where they said exactly this, that Asian Americans are the least likely group to be promoted. And so when you couple that with the fact that Asian Americans have a higher poverty rate than non-Hispanic whites, it's clear that as an Asian American, particularly an Asian American employee, you're not going to get any help. You're not going to get any assistance, and there's a general perception that you don't need any, despite the fact that you probably do. And so I think the combination of the bamboo ceiling and the model minority myth makes it very challenging for Asian Americans to realize their full potential in corporate America. Hey, Patty, for some reason I can't hear you.
I kept on hovering over the mute buttons.
Okay.
Dave, thank you for that. So many of the things that resonate with all of us in the room, and those of us that are going to be watching later. I myself have had that conversation with our team as Yvonne and was reading off all of the things that I've been able to. Well, I will double down on what you said, which is it has been the hardest being the only Asian face in the room of department heads. It has always been that it's been very hard to get to any level of executive leadership without doing a lot more than probably anybody else. So I appreciate your words on that, and I know. Let's see, I think if we have, can we actually, now that we've talked about these important terms and how they, resonate with us, can we have our first poll? We'd like to make this interactive. Can we see the first question, please? So the poll is live. And I hope that people can click on that poll, and it reads, if you are PI, do you feel the model minority treatment at work? And we're talking specifically for for Santa Monica right now.
Yeah, looks like the vast majority feel that way. And I don't think it's
Like
uncommon
70.
in America.
All right, let me just. So 69% voted yes, 6% no, 6% not sure. It's vacillating a little bit, and for some of us that doesn't apply. But it looks like at least 60% of the community who are AAPI feel that way. Thank you so much. If we could just close the poll. Now, Dave, let's hear some that were pre-submitted by staff because they are subjects that you often discuss in your columns and your blog posts. The first one's about your personal experience, and it's 3 parts, so I'm going to start off with one and move forward. Dave, in your opinion, what do you think contributed acceleration through the corporate ladder in your Wall Street career? And you might not think it was a quick acceleration, so if you could talk to us a little bit about that, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, sure. So it, I've always been a young person in a rush, so it certainly didn't feel quick to me. But I think the evidence was that I was one of the youngest to ever get promoted at each of the levels within my old firm. So at least empirically, it was an accelerated career. And I did reach kind of that managing director level at the age of 33, which is pretty good for the industry. So, I think if I were to give an overarching piece of reflection or commentary on what I think ultimately contributed to my acceleration through my career is really a philosophy around I'm a big believer that understanding what makes people tick is really critical to your career. And if you peel back that focus or that understanding, it's really about how are people motivated? What are the incentives necessary to get them to do what you want? And so I was an economics major in undergrad, and I continued to study everything I could in the economics field. And one of the big areas of economics, which has won numerous Nobel Prizes and is a big focus of podcasts and research today, is this whole area that proves that people aren't really perfect agents, that people don't actually act completely rational. And these are fields like behavioral economics and cognitive bias that show that people aren't rational and that they're motivated by things that may seem irrational. And so I've always kept that in the back of my mind as I progressed up the corporate ladder. And so with this backdrop, I learned really early on that to get your superiors to promote you, to pay you, to achieve your full potential is you needed them to feel that they were making a good decision in investing in you and in promoting your career and helping you. And they needed to own it because ultimately you need people to support you in any organization, unless it's an organization of one. You need to make sure that people are helping you navigate your career. And the way to do that is really to make sure that other people understand how you could be used as a utility for them to advance their own motivation. And so I always thought very deeply about how do I help my boss be more successful? How do I help my boss's boss be more successful? And one of the things that I borrowed and really impressed upon me was this notion that people are really risk averse. Ultimately, this is a whole field of science that won a Nobel Prize called prospect theory, which shows that people are risk averse and hate losses more than they love gains. And so knowing that my managers and my bosses are, as human beings, ultimately more risk averse, I wanted to make sure that I would always cover all the bases. I would always make sure that I mastered the job at hand as quickly as possible so that I could cover the table stakes, so that my boss and my boss's boss would feel like, okay, Dave's a safe pair of hands. I know he's going to get the job done, and he'll be a good worker bee, and I don't have to worry about him. But then I would always make sure that I would try to punch above my weight class. I'd always try to make sure that I would show my potential. And if there was ever an opportunity to show my potential, I would try to do that. Because look, what nobody ever really talks about is the fact that every boss, and they'll never admit this publicly, is that they want you to do their job, but they don't want you to take their job, right? And so it was really important for me to always give my boss the impression that I could do their job for them, but I don't want their job, right? And so I spent a lot of time not only mastering my job, but also showing them the potential that I could do their job and help them and give them leverage on their time and still be a loyal foot soldier, so that they would visualize me at the next level, so that as they progressed in their career, I would naturally be pulled up along with them. So I'd say at a very, very high level, that philosophy and always thinking about how I can help others achieve their goals, particularly my boss achieve their goals, really helped me move up the corporate ladder. I can go into a lot more kind of details about exactly what I did, but what I'll say is that on a more tactical level, it's really the small things that make a difference. Just like the old adage that one big problem is really a bunch of small ones. I firmly believe that one big solution to getting promoted is really just a bunch of small solutions. So I spent a lot of time, really making sure that all the little things added up. So, it was really basic things like I'm an early riser. Like I wake up usually between 4 to 5 a.m. So I was always one of the first people in the office, and most of the senior people would come in between 8 to 9 o'clock. So I had a full 3 to 4 hours on them when I could get stuff done. I could double check my work. I could make sure that, when their day starts, everything that they asked me to do was taken care of. I was always very aggressive in asking for more assignments whenever, I had extra bandwidth. I personally think it's very hard to actually have work-life balance. I actually don't even believe in it. I think it's really more of a work-life trade-off, and it's a very personal decision. But for me, I decided that I would overinvest in my work when I was younger, so effectively pay my dues when I was younger, when I didn't have a family, so that perhaps later in life, I could index more towards the life side of the balance equation and enjoy the fruits of my labor. So I would be very aggressive in asking for more assignments. And one other thing, which I think is really resonates with the Asian American audience, is that it's really, really hard to be good at everything. And it's really hard as Asian Americans because, if you have Asian American parents, which I'm sure a lot of us do, I certainly do, if you could get all A's and everything, but if you got one B, like that's what your parents focused on. They're like, I know you got A's and everything, but why'd you get this B in this, right? And I think that becomes so ingrained with you when you're growing up that when you're rising in your corporate career, you're always thinking about, I got to be good at everything. Like I got to do a good job at everything. And the fact of the matter is that's not really true. When you have a world where it's a game of inches and lots of people are qualified to be promoted, lots of people can do the job to a certain extent, good doesn't really get you promoted. Great does. And so one of the things that I realized really earlier in my career is that you don't have to be good at everything. You just have to be great at something. And that great is ideally something that the organization overall values. And so one of the things that I did as I was rising up the corporate ladder was I was really focused on the niches and the skill sets that I looked around and saw nobody else really had. Nobody's really focusing on this particular industry and doesn't have that expertise, or nobody seems to know how to do this type of transaction or know how to do this type of project. I'm really good at that. And I developed expertise and brand associated with that. And so maybe I wasn't the best leader, for instance, the best motivator of people, but man, I was really good at this one area that the firm really valued because it generated a lot of revenue, or it was like the next hot area. And so I have found that in my career, the people that really do get promoted and move up the corporate ladder, particularly as the stakes get higher and the game is a game of inches, and the differentiation between people becomes thinner. I find that the people that do crack through are the ones that are really great at something and aren't necessarily good at everything. And I think that's one of the challenges that Asian American people have in particular, which is like, I think from a very young age, we're taught to be good at everything. And I don't think that actually gets rewarded as you go up the corporate ladder. I think it's actually the opposite. It's like, yeah, he's kind of good at everything, but he's not great at anything. Okay, well, why don't we pick this other person who seems to be great at sales, but is not great at anything else? But sales really matter within our organization. So I guess my overarching advice and upon reflection on my own career is that really understanding people, knowing what motivates people, and then all the little things really matter. Everything from like getting out in the office early, triple checking your work, making sure that you're aware of what your boss is looking for. All those little things add up into like a successful career.
Dave, thank you so much. That was so if I could unpack this a little bit, I think one of the things you said was you knew your job, you did it well, just interested in making your advisors and the leaders in your organization look good, and not competing with them for their position. But as they advance, you would advance with them. That really it's a game of inches, not necessarily needing to be perfect at everything, but really thinking about how you can gain an advantage by being a specialist or something that you're really, really good at or great at in terms of potential advancing. One of the questions the team is, do you think that in addition to all of that wonderful, fantastic effort that you put into everything, did the model minority myth help you accelerating a little bit, or do you really think it was just all of those extra effort you put in?
So I actually think that bias, stereotypes, of which the model minority myth is obviously a key one, are just part of the human condition. The model minority myth has been around for half a century and probably will take another generation to ultimately eliminate, if ever. And the reality is that we all have biases. Think about the last time you rushed to judgment on someone because of their gender, because of the color of their skin, or simply the way they walked and talked, right? And there's plenty of research to show that this is deeply rooted in evolutionary biology. In many ways, it kind of kept us out of the harm's way, right? Because there are these natural triggers in our mind that help us, determine whether someone is friend or foe, right? And so I firmly believe that model minority myths and stereotypes are a fact of life. Now, what I decided to do, and I continue to emphasize this to Asian Americans, is I choose to leverage the ones that help me and minimize or counter the ones that hurt me, right? So, for instance, if my boss, when he sees me, thinks I'm naturally hardworking and am good at math and therefore have a strong ability to learn and maybe come from an ethnic background that has low criminality and therefore obedient, then those are all probably positive in terms of like helping me engender trust and also be viewed as a safe pair of hands, right? Like if you go back to my comments about prospect theory and people being naturally risk averse, the traits that I just mentioned actually lend me towards being a pretty good hire in terms of a junior person, right? Now, there's a lot of model minority myth traits lack of gregariousness, kind of obedient, not inspirational, not aggressive. Like these are all traits that actually hurt me as I want to go up the corporate ladder, right? Like these are things that that probably don't make me quote unquote leadership material. And so I think the thing that I always thought through was, how do I leverage those elements of my my background that are helpful to advancing my career, and then what are the ones that are actually hurting me because they are ones that counter the view that I could be viewed as a leader or as a manager. And so I would go out of my way to make sure that I would leverage the good ones and then counter the bad ones. And there's lots of ways to do that. One of the things that I did earlier in my career was I would always try to demonstrate some of these leadership potential characteristics in low stakes scenarios first. So what would that be? I would volunteer to go pitch potential prospects or companies that people viewed as a very low probability. So the perception among my managers and the firm was that, hey, if Dave is able to make sunshine out of this, then great. If not, no harm, no foul. Nobody loses. I would try to volunteer and make sure that I was front and center on events that were not revenue generating, which again are viewed as generally low stakes situations. So things like training, even things like casual office parties or things of that nature. So I think there's lots of different ways that one can demonstrate some of these leadership capabilities in these lower stakes situations. And that's frankly what I did to try to counter some of these biases that are inherent within the model minority myth. Hey, Patty, I'm not seeing your video, and I'm not sure if everybody else can.
Yeah, this is Yvonne. I'm not sure if Patty is having audio issues, so I'm going to jump in and ask the next question that was pre-submitted by our membership. So, Dave, what do you think? What can AAPI staff do to break through the bamboo ceiling while staying authentic to themselves and not perpetuating harmful stereotypes?
Yeah, so I touched a little bit on this in the prior question, but I really say this with sincerity. You got to pick your battles. You got to figure out when are situations where you're really going to impress upon people, your truly authentic self, and when are situations where it's just not worth it. I do believe that being 100% true to yourself in your personal life is absolutely a must. I firmly believe that around your friends and your family, you should be who you are, because I think fundamentally, if you're not going to be happy. But then there's work, and there's a reason they call it work. They don't call work life; they call work. And I'm not sure that you can be 100% authentic at work. I mean, just ask yourself: would you act exactly the same way in front of your boss as you would your mom? Of course not. At least I wouldn't. And so I think that you need to make sure that you are yourself, but also pick your battles. There's going to be situations where it's a low stakes situation where it doesn't really matter, right? Like I said, but then there are going to be times where you feel, frankly, offended or feel that someone is really overstepping their bounds, and those are definitely the situations that you have to raise your hand or make sure that you're making it clear to non-Asians that they are perpetuating stereotypes. They are assuming things about you that are just not correct. But rest assured, I think history, and at least today, corporate America is on your side. Um, Gender and race relations are the third rail in America, particularly in corporate America. And I think it's getting better every day because now, we're really aware of it. And at least we're having conversations around these things. And so I would just say, pick your battles, try, like I said, like what I did, try to demonstrate your leadership capabilities. Start off with like kind of low stakes situations where the organization's like, yeah, fine, let him or her give it a shot, because if they fail, it's not a big deal, and then prove them wrong. And then slowly, as you develop credibility and you have those small victories, then ask for more, ask for bigger stakes situations, ask for bigger budgets, bigger projects to demonstrate your capability. But that's essentially how I would do it. I would do it through a little bit of an incremental approach rather than just going straight into your boss's office and saying, like, hey, I want this or else. I generally find that ultimatums just don't work in the corporate world.
Well, that's such great advice, Dave, because what you're looking for is a win-win, right? Not a win-lose, but a win-win situation. So thank you for that. So we have another pre-submitted question. Dave, as you were making your way through your career, are there any key moments that stand out to you where you listened to your intuition to do what was right for you, as opposed to outside advice or westernized norms?
Yeah,
so what is your answer to that?
I would say every single day. Every single day, I would be thinking 100% about how does this project, this deal, this thing my boss wants me to do, how is that helping me advance my career? How is that getting me closer to my goal, which, when I started my career was like, I want to be able to exit stage right, in my 40s, right? Like, so I would constantly think about every single opportunity, every single situation as a stepping stone that would get me closer to my destination. Now, there were certainly situations where I felt that I might be taking a little bit of a step back, or I might be meandering and I'm not getting closer to my ultimate destination. But then I remind myself of a saying that I live by, which is to what end? That every short-term decision I made would be based upon my view of its long-term ramifications. So sometimes I would decide something, I would do something that ultimately may not necessarily help me in the long run, but maybe is the right thing to do at that point in time, right? For instance, there's this generic advice that you should always, particularly Asian Americans, need to speak up more, be more aggressive, right? And in general, I agree with that, but I also say you got to pick your battles. There were times when I was silent and I didn't lobby or complain. But trust me, when there were times related to compensation or title, and those were on the table, I definitely spoke up. I made it clear I wasn't going to be pushed around, and that these are things that are really important to me. And so I think that the key moments that really stood out for me related to compensation and title, because those two were very much aligned with my ultimate long-term goal of where I wanted to be. And so I would make sure that those were moments that I would spend a lot of time thinking about and tactically determining whether or not I should be more aggressive or less aggressive. Should I make it clear my dissatisfaction or not? And every situation was different. If you're looking for a very specific piece of advice on compensation, because I get asked that all the time, like, how do I get paid more? How should I deal with that, right? My general advice to you on that, which worked really well for me, was always focus on the moments right after you've done something great, right? Going back to the be great, not necessarily good, but great, right? If you just completed a great project, or you just got recognition by your peers for achieving something great, that's when you need to make it clear to your boss that, you know what, money and title isn't the only factor in why I'm working at this job, but I want to be treated fairly. And you, my boss, have the power to take money and title off the table. And so don't make me think about that stuff. Like, make sure I'm taken care of so I can focus on my job and doing a great job for you or the organization. And I just did it, right? I just came off of a great project where you recognize what a great work I did, and my peers recognize what great work I did. And so that is the best time to quote unquote lobby for more compensation. Do that early and often. If you are lobbying for compensation at the end of the year or whenever the bonus cycle comes up or whenever your pay cycle comes up, then you've already lost the battle. Like, it's already too late, right? And at that point, if you're lobbying, then people just look at you and go, oh, you're just lobbying now because it's the season. What I always found is don't lobby when the season comes up. Lobby preseason. Do all your selling right after the moments that you've done something great. You did a great deal or you did a great project. And then by the time the actual compensation season comes up, it'll be so ingrained in your boss's mind, like, oh yeah, you know what? I got to make sure Dave gets paid well this year, or I got to make sure Dave gets a promotion because he's been reminding me, every time he's been doing great work, that he doesn't want to worry about that stuff. So I'm his manager, I'm his boss. I got to make sure that I take care of him. And I find 9 times out of 10 that strategy works really well. So to summarize, I would say that there weren't any key, moments that stuck out in particular. I was always thinking about how do I advance my career every day of every moment because I had an end goal in mind. But if I were to overemphasize certain key moments, they were definitely related to compensation and title because those are the two that really go hand in hand as you are ascending in your career and trying to basically take stock of whether or not you're making it up the corporate ladder or not.
As they say, timing is everything, right? And with that, I can see that Patty is back online with us. Patty, can you hear us? Seems like she's still having a little bit of a connection issue. That's okay. So we'll keep moving on. So we actually have another poll question for our audience members. So backstage moderators, can we please see the second poll question? All right, so the second question is, do you feel biases about your race or ethnicity has impacted your career trajectory? Yes, no, or not sure, or not applicable? So we'll give everybody a few seconds.
Yeah, it looks like a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this fundamentally goes to the point I made earlier, which is, we're kind of raised in this environment where you're supposed to be good at everything. And I think if you're good at everything, it's really hard to be great at anything because, we're all human and we only have a certain amount of bandwidth. And in the corporate ladder where it truly is a game of inches between do I promote this person or that person because they both seem pretty good, being great at something does differentiate you.
Right. Okay, so let's end the poll. Yeah, that looks like 61% of the audience members feels like the answer was yes, that they did feel some sort of bias about their race or ethnicity at some point of their career. So that leads me to my next question. What are some of your suggestions on how to counter any unconscious bias stereotypes that AAPI employees may encounter when they enter a workplace?
Yeah, so my general advice on this is you definitely want to nip it in the bud. Like you don't want it to fester because in many ways, if you let it fester, you're doing a disservice to your other AAPI peers and all the other AAPI who come after you, right? But I do believe that at least the initial times that these stereotypes come up or somebody says something that is offensive, I do believe the first time I wouldn't necessarily do it in an adversarial way. I have a belief that I always assume good heart, bad brain, which is ultimately I try to believe that people have a good heart, but maybe the brain is not computing it correctly. Maybe they don't know how to say it the right way. So good heart, bad brain, right? So I believe that I try to believe that the malicious intent isn't there, but the delivery was bad, right? And so I try to approach that person, try to do it privately, and basically give them honest feedback. There's a term in psychology called wise feedback, and I think wise feedback is a really good way to give feedback in any situation, whether you have a subordinate or even a superior, and trying to give them general feedback. And the wise feedback method is essentially you give people feedback, but you wrap it around the message, which is, I want you to be better. I'm trying to convey high expectations that I expect of you, and then you give them the message. And psychology and research has shown that when you tell someone, hey, look, I expect more of you, and I want you to be better, and here's my message, people hear that message more than if you just say to them, hey, you know what, you should do the following, right? And so wise feedback is a great way to give any form of feedback, and I think it's a really good way to do it as it relates to AAPI stereotypes. So you would deliver it and say, look, I know you didn't mean to be offensive, but what you just said is really offensive, and it's offensive to people like me, and let me explain to you why. So I think you should stop saying that, and we're all good. Now, if it persists, then I would definitely elevate it to HR, because then it's not good heart, bad brain. It's bad brain and bad heart, right? Like, this person is clearly malicious. But that's how I would counter any unconscious stereotypes. I'd be very direct about it. I try to assume a non-malicious intent first, deliver it with this wise feedback that I said, and if that doesn't work, then I go to HR and make it clear. Because again, you as an AAPI person, you have an obligation to make the environment better for everybody. And if you don't nip it in the bud, that's how these things fester, and then ultimately becomes part of the culture of the organization. And then it's really hard to root out.
Yeah, that is so true. So we are going to take a slight left turn, or we have a more specific question asked by, I assume, a female AAPI staff member. The question is, for AAPI female staff working in a male-dominated industry with masculine cultural norms, do you have any tips on how to excel and advance and pitfalls to avoid? So this question is for Dave, and also I think Patty is actually able to hear us. She's having video issues, but I believe her audio works. So this question is for both of you, Dave and Patty, if you have any advice for our AAPI female employees in general.
Okay, so given Patty's a woman, Patty, do you want to answer that first?
No, actually, I want to reverse that, Dave. I want you to answer that first, and then I'll follow up, if you don't mind.
Sure. So let me start off with saying that one of my pet peeves in life is I never want someone to assume they know what it's like to walk in another person's shoes. Because I just think it's really hard for anybody to relate to anybody, like, and assume a lot. And so with that massive caveat, right, like, I obviously will never know what it's like to be an Asian American woman. Like, I don't know what it's like. All I can tell you is what it's like to be an Asian American man living in America and working in America. That being said, like, if you were forcing me to give you advice, I would say, kind of tongue in cheek, yeah, first recognize that all men are pigs. Okay, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek because I'm often reminded of a quote from the novelist Margaret Atwood, the writer of The Handmaid's Tale, and when she asked a male friend, why men feel threatened by women, that man answered, well, they're afraid women will laugh at them. And then when Margaret Atwood asked a group of women why they feel threatened by men, they said, we're afraid of being killed, right? Like, so just think about that for a minute, just reflect on that. That's a really stark contrast, right? Like, if I'm a man and my perception is that, the worst thing that could happen to me is I could be laughed at. And then a woman feels like the worst thing that could be happen to them is they could be killed, right? That's a whole different perspective on things that I, as a man, could never appreciate, right? Like, because again, like that's a whole different worldview. That being said, look, I think it's really challenging. I think, as an AAPI woman, you're the minority of the minority. You have to be really hypervigilant about like the stereotypes and the biases that exist out there. There was a very recent report, I think it was issued last week or 2 weeks ago, by the Gina Davis Institute, and you can Google the article. I think it was called "I am not a fetish or a model minority," and it talked about how Asian American AAPI women are represented in the media, and unfortunately, the media is really the well from which all these stereotypes spring. And if you look at some of the stuff that was written in this article, it's clear that Asian American women suffer from racism and sexism. They suffer from being disempowered and also exploited. And in a lot of men's minds, they're viewed as more passive and sexual, right? And less clearly not in the same areas of like leadership and aggressiveness, things that frankly corporate America rewards. And so I think as an Asian American AAPI woman, I think you have to recognize that these stereotypes are really strong and they're out there, and you need to think through how do you counter some of these stereotypes, right? So that you don't immediately get put in a penalty box that the media sets you up for, and then you have to kind of crawl your way out. And so, I don't have any daughters, but if I had daughters, and I've advised my wife on this, you got to make sure that you speak up, and if any of this kind of sexism or racist behavior happens, that you definitely need to nip that in the bud, like, because in many ways, if you don't say anything, then you're actually reinforcing some of these media stereotypes I just mentioned. The passivity and the willingness to just be somebody's punching bag, right? And it takes a lot of guts, and frankly, it's difficult. And again, I can't even relate to what it would be like, but know that I think there's a lot of focus on this now. Like people, I'd like to think that there are a lot of men like me out there who recognize this is a problem and are allies. Will come to help. If these issues become more pervasive. But yeah, I think it's obviously very difficult given the underlying media biases that are out there, and it's doubly challenging. But I think, trying to find obvious things like mentors, trying to find male mentors, right? Men that empathize with the challenges, right? I think I would like to think I'm one of them, but like try to find people like me to be supportive, I think are really critical in helping advance your career.
Patty, what do you think? If you can spend a couple minutes answering that question, and the next question is also for you, Patty.
Dave, thank you for that, and thank you for being an ally in the work. I think we're very lucky to have you. But I will say that women are not as enlightened as you. I think, rather than, I was raised in a feminist household, which was very unique also for the generation of Chinese Americans in my family too. But I will say that seeking the right kinds of mentors and allies, I think is a very important part of, you can't trust everyone. I am sorry to say that out loud. There are just as many women, I would say, as men in higher level and as colleagues who may feel a little jealous and or threatened by you. So sometimes you have to really get to know people well. And I'm not saying that you don't trust folks, because that's not what I'm all about. In fact, most of you who know me, I am very trusting and trustworthy, but on some levels, you need to decide for yourself that temperature that you take around other people, and surround yourself with people who believe in you and the good work that you do, regardless of what you look like. I mean, I think that's really it more than anything else. I'm looking at from the vantage point of tips and criteria. Yes, be mindful. You may not have as many people in your corner, but you have the opportunity to surround yourselves with people who care very much about you, and are willing to step forward when that needs to happen. And that is both in the male and the female side of the house. But know that actually, in my experience, think, unfortunately, most of the women, both women of color and Caucasian women, have not always been interested in moving me forward because they feel a little threatened. So what I would say to all those ways up is you get through those times when not so good experience. To think carefully about how you build your collegiality around your community and what that looks like, and that means working through groups like our group here. It also means going outside the department and reaching out even beyond the city to other locations. I would suggest to you, just for the team that's listening today, that Better Up coaching experience that we all had an opportunity, and I hope that it continues, because I think Lori and HR is moving forward. That was probably one of the best things I ever did in terms of boosting my own commitments to community and career, and it's resulted in a stronger advantage. I would actually always say, go for another coach and mentor other people, and also choose wisely in terms of your own coaching. And I can speak more about this later on separately, but I know we have to move on to other. Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Yvonne, for your leadership right now. It's a lot.
Oh, you're so welcome. This is teamwork, right? It takes a lot to put on an event like this in the middle of COVID, doing it virtually. So we thank everybody for being here with us and for being patient with us with all the technical difficulties. So Patty, you touched on this a little bit already. What advice would you have for AAPI staff within the public sector, such as here specifically within the city of Santa Monica, to increase the amount of AAPI leadership within public management and upper management at the executive level?
So knowing your statistics is very important. I think there was made mention that we had 6 to 7%, which is about 100 employees right now that are AAPI. I would do the demographics even a little further and actually discuss where those individuals are at in their own trajectory career-wise. Keep in mind that Santa Monica is 13% Asian American. We as a city do not pay attention to that community. And so I would actually gain some allies that are interested in the issue, even at the council level. And I know that that's a little hard for me to say that that community is waiting to be heard. They were overjoyed when I first came on board, and we saw more Asian Americans coming to the library than ever before. And it was great, but they also need to know that they have a voice, because oftentimes when we talk about diversity and EDI, and by that I mean equity, diversity, and inclusion within the Santa Monica community, we actually often think about it as African American or Latinx, Latino. and we don't include Asian Americans in that group. And I'm not continues to happen, but I think if you had allies actually from the community to assist you with that, we actually have some CEOs and some strong members who are active in the neighborhood associations who are Asian American, and I think they would be happy to advocate on behalf of staff because they also realize that there's a lack of community engagement at that end. So demographics, making the case for it, I think actually sharing the fact that this program happened, that I think really elevates the conversation. I would actually have our executive leadership listen to this. There's a very strong reason why, as a community, we don't want to be that group that is voiceless. And as I feel right now that I have no video either, and we need to make sure that it's part of the conversation. So I would approach our city leadership, especially the pod that's dealing around equity. Debbie is part of that. Involve in news. I think the time has come. I also think that Lori at HR is trying very, very hard to try to diversify the panels that are involved in recruitment and selection, and you need to be part of that conversation too. And it has to happen throughout the city. It cannot happen just in one department.
Thank you, Patty. That's some very specific advice for us, the AAPI employees that are still with the city, even as you move on to the city of Santa Clara. So we will definitely continue to carry the torch and carry these conversations forward. So the time is 1:09. I think we've entered the portion of our event where I'm going to go to some live questions. So Dave and Patty, if you can both stand by. The first question is for Dave. Dave, did you feel that you had to compromise your culture and ethnic identity to climb the corporate ladder?
No, I didn't. But I certainly didn't go out of my way to show that I was different. I mean, you can obviously see it in my face, right? Like I worked in an industry that was dominated by Caucasian men, but I didn't throw it in their face that, I eat chicken feet, or, I spend time in Asia a lot, right? Like I just tried to initially win the battle by being viewed as just one of the guys, right? Like, so I grew up in Hong Kong, and then when I came to the U.S., I made sure that I happened to like a lot of sports, but I didn't care for baseball. But I spent a lot of time learning about basketball, and I love basketball. And so whenever the conversation, which inevitably happens with guys, goes towards sports, if it was ever, kind of baseball, I just zone out, and then I kind of switch the topic, right, to something else that I liked. So I don't think I ever compromised on my ethnicity, but I certainly didn't throw it in people's face, because when you're a junior person, like nobody wants to get reminded time and time again that you're different from them, because like I said right at the beginning, they want a safe pair of hands, right? They want someone that they can look at and go, you know what, if I tell Dave I need this project done or this deal done, like I trust him because he kind of reminds me of a young version of me, right? Those are some of the affinity elements that I think really help you, and frankly help the majority when they're going up the corporate ladder. So I would just make sure that I wouldn't throw it in their face. But if they had questions or there was opportunities more casually to volunteer that, absolutely. I talk about what it's like to grow up in Hong Kong and live in China and stuff like that. But I wouldn't go out of my way to accentuate the differences I had with my peers, because like I said earlier, it doesn't necessarily help me as a junior person. It might help you when you get really senior and people are interested and fascinated and want to spend time with people that are different. But I find that when you're junior, like people are really just looking for people they can trust to do the job right.
Very well. So you mentioned that you grew up in Hong Kong, and fun fact, so did I.
Cool.
So we can talk offline more about Hong Kong. So the second question is, do you think growing up as a member of the majority in Hong Kong and moving to the United States with that background help you in your climb up the corporate ladder? And what do you tell your children or other young AAPIs to do the same when they grow up as a minority in the United States?
Yeah, so I definitely think if I reflect upon my life, that definitely helped me a lot because I did not. I grew up feeling like I didn't feel like I was second class in any way. Uh, there are certain elements of my background which we don't need to get into too much here. But like my mother was born in the Philippines and my father was born in Shanghai. So even though I look like Han Chinese, like I'm effectively Chinese Filipino, and there's a lot of racism, frankly, in Asia around people, particularly Southeast Asians or Filipinos. So that being said, like I never felt growing up that I was a second-class citizen. And when I came here, the whole dynamic was quite strange to me, right? It was a little bit of, well, wait a minute, like now I'm no longer in the majority. But because I think I grew up being in the majority and never feeling like I was second class, I think that really helped me. That gave me a lot more confidence and frankly, not really caring about what other people think, to really be aggressive and to fulfill my full potential. It's in many ways, I'm trying to transplant that same environment to my boys. I decided to put them in Chinese immersion school for two reasons. One is I want them to be really well versed at a business level in Chinese culture and Chinese language. That's something that I'm not versed at. I'm kind of neophyte level. And so one, I wanted them to have the language and culture. And the second, I wanted to put them in the school where they were majority. And they are. Like in their school here in the Silicon Valley Bay Area, they've grown up in an environment where the majority of the kids that they go to class with look like them. They're not a minority. And there will come a time in the corporate world where they will be a minority, but I don't necessarily want them to feel a minority and in worst case feel like a second class citizen as they're growing up. And I've talked to friends of mine that have daughters who put their daughters in all girls school, and I think it's quite similar. Like it's the same kind of environment where girls are able to really flourish when they don't have to deal with all the garbage and the drama that comes with having guys in the class, right? Who are maybe a little bit more aggressive or more fooling around. And so I've tried to transplant some of my own environmental upbringing to them by putting them in a Chinese school.
Yeah, that's so interesting you say that, Dave. And I think that sentiment will probably echo with a lot of our other affinity groups as well, right? That sentiment of not or consciously feeling like being the minority in the room. So thank you for sharing that. So our next question is, have you ever felt the need to unlearn some of the thought processes that your parents instilled in you? In my experience, the audience said, my Asian parents have ingrained this idea in my head that I should remain the silent, agreeable worker. However, I feel that this characteristic is not conducive to moving up.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of being good at everything is really hard for I think a lot of us to let go of. You only have a certain number of hours in the day, and you really need to prove to your employer and society in general that you are unique. I have a term I use, which I coined in my book, which is from the Latin word unus, U-N-U-S. And I tell people that if you want to go up the corporate ladder, you have to be unus, and unus is a Latin for one and only. And what I mean by that is you need to think about how to package yourself as a unique asset, not as a commodity. And unfortunately, I think we live in a world where we're all kind of viewed as resources. We're all kind of viewed as commodities. So the more you can differentiate yourself, the better. But in order to differentiate yourself, you really do need to focus. You need to figure out what can you really be great at. And if you were to draw a Venn diagram, what you're great at and what society values overlaps, right? And that's where you can get promoted and get a lot of compensation. But it's really hard to be great at something if you try to be good at everything. And so I think that's probably, even to this day, frankly, that's one of the toughest things for me to let go of, right? Because I know that was the way my mother raised me. That's the way I got through school, right? It's all about like, hey, you got to get the highest GPA, got to do really well. But when I got to the corporate world, I realized that there's a lot of people that are good at everything that get passed over, that don't get the fat office or the big promotion. Like they just get passed over because somebody else may have more faults than them, but they're really great at something that the organization values. So I would say that's probably the one big kind of like Asian heritage, cultural thing that I still, even to this day, have a really hard time, letting go of. But I realized that in order to really progress in my career, I needed to be really great at certain things and not try to be good at everything. And something to take solace in is that there are very few careers where you're really on your own, right? There are very few careers where you don't have a team around you, right? And so one of the things that I learned when I was going up the corporate ladder and I had more people working for me and more partners was like, I didn't need to be great at everything. I didn't need to be good at everything because like I have other partners or other people that I can rely on for those things. So, a good friend of mine gave me a really interesting way to kind of think about it, which is like you have grades for all your skills, right? You have some of your skills you would rank as like a B plus, some you would rank as like a C plus, etc. And the way he phrased it was that what you should do is you should take those skills that you're a B plus and try to make them an A plus. And then the skills where you're a B minus or a B, forget about those. Like you don't have time to make those A. Nobody can be all A plus. So try to be A, turn your B plus skills into A plus, and then surround yourself with people that are A plus in those other things that you're not really good at. And I would tell you, because mostly all of corporate America is a team-based environment. Again, unless you're a writer or a blogger, right? Like you have an organization that you rely on. Like that's really good advice. I really think that has helped a lot of people. And also, my last point on this, it explains that feeling that we all have sometimes when we look at our boss or our boss's boss and go like, gosh, this person is not good at lots of things. Like, how did they get that job? How are they promoted? Well, the odds are quite high that they're good at something, right? Maybe they're A plus at politics, right? But the odds are quite high that the reason why they got that job is because they were really good at one thing, or maybe a couple things, and they're not great. They don't have to be good at everything, but they're really great at one or two things. And so that's why I think that trying to let go a little of that Asian heritage around trying to be good at everything, I think is a good thing to think about as you're progressing up the corporate ladder.
Great advice. So essentially just focus on your highest ROI, your highest return on investment, right? Just focus on those things and know that you cannot be great at everything. So the next question, and I'm not sure if this is so much as a question or a comment. In my career, I've seen clubs, and these clubs mentor and groom those who are in the club to the exclusion of others. Many times the people in the club are in the HOV lane, an analogy you used earlier, but have no clue of their privileges or advantages. If they are called out for being clubbers, they don't see the bias. So do you have, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a question, but I'll comment on it, like, which is, that's the way the world works. We are fundamentally a tribal species. And like I said, I think a lot of it goes back to evolutionary biology, right? Like the reason why we surround ourselves with people that kind of look like us, talk like us, are us, is because we like the warmth that a group and the protection that a group gives us. And there's a lot of research out there that shows that this is actually part of the reason why senior management are so homogeneous. It's because the decisions being made at the senior level have wide-reaching ramifications, and so people like to surround themselves with people that they think relate to them and understand them better. And so, unfortunately, I think that's just part of human nature and part of the human condition. The key, I think, to think about it is how do you then use that to your advantage? And I think the way you use that to your advantage is you figure out, like, how do I get in the tribe? how do I not lose my authenticity, but still be viewed as someone that is trusted, that can be in the tribe, that the organization can see me as leadership material. And like I said earlier, I think it's a combination of leveraging those characteristics of yours that are part of the stereotype that help you, like the positives of the model minority myth, and then trying to diffuse over time those that hurt you, and do that with kind of start off with low stakes situations where your manager or the organization has no problem giving those to you to prove yourself because there's not a lot at stake, right? And then as you prove yourself, then ask for bigger and bigger, higher stakes situations. And that's exactly what I did. Like started off with clients and prospects that the firm had written off, and they're like, yeah, nobody, who cares? Like, there's no chance Dave's going to get this deal anyway, so yeah, go for it. And then as I slowly proved myself, I'd start to ask for the juicy your prospects. Like, oh, well, I proved it on this other thing. Like, I want the bigger project. I want the bigger opportunity. And then over time, you slowly get accepted into the tribe, right? They slowly view you as one of the trusted inner circle, and it no surprise, it moves hand in hand with your ascendancy in the corporate ladder. So I'm sad that that's the way the world is, but that's the world we live in, and you can either accept it and figure out how to use it to your advantage, or you can be just really mad about it, but that doesn't really help you.
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask two more questions, and before we end this event. So the next question is, I think Asian females have a harder time being viewed as leaders unless they jump twice as high as others. Even then, the achievements are glossed over or undercounted. Do you see any statistics supporting this? Any advice for Asian women trying to climb the corporate ladder? So this question is similar to one that was pre-submitted that you answered earlier, but if you can elaborate on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd have to go find that a Harvard Business School article, but anybody can Google it. It's 2018, but I do recall that there were some stats in there about AAPI females, but don't. I'm not positive, but I think that there's some evidence in there. I think the big takeaway was honestly that the whole category of AAPI, Asian Americans, was the least likely to be promoted, category in corporate America. And not only do you don't really need to read that article just to look at company by company in America. The stats are all the same. It's always like, there's a lot of diversity and, gender diversity and ethnic diversity at the junior level, and then it all pretty much disappears by the mid-level. And I will tell you, I actually think there's a very simple explanation for that, which is these things matter to organizations when the stakes are quite low. But when the stakes are very high, they don't matter as much. And the reality is that when you're moving up the corporate ladder and you're deciding who to promote, right? This person or that person, the stakes get exponentially higher. The compensation gets exponentially higher. The title and the power get exponentially higher. And so when you get to the very top, a lot of these feel-good statements around diversity, inclusion, gender parity, all that, I think they get thrown out the window. And you look no further than like Wall Street, which isn't exactly the best industry, but they talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. But you look at the senior organizations of firms that are viewed as the most progressive, like a Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, and even now, over 80% of senior leadership are white men. Even now, right? They never talk about that. They talk about, like, look at all the minorities we hire and women we hire at the junior level. Look at our stats, right? But they don't tell the full story because the stakes are much lower at the junior level than they are at the senior level. And so I think as an Asian American AAPI woman, it's just doubly tough. And like I said, there needs to be more mentorship. But I also think one idea that I think is worth considering, and I think you guys are kind of doing it a little bit with CAPE, is that I like to joke that in companies there's a little bit of a prisoner's dilemma. And if you're familiar with kind of like the prisoner's dilemma, essentially this idea that two completely rational people might not cooperate, right? Even if it's in their best interest to do so, because you both want what's best for the organization or the company, but because there's only one senior role, right, you both fight to sabotage each other, right? And in many ways, this echoes what Patty said earlier about some of the situations, particularly with other women, right? There might be a perception like, well, there's only really one role available, so I'm not necessarily going to help you. And I think part of the opportunity is actually to get over that, right? And I think the low-hanging fruit, so the people that are most likely to say, you know what, like I have no more skin in the game, and I'm willing to help you. Let's say I'm a senior female executive, like I'm willing to help you, a junior female executive. I think the low-hanging fruit are people that are retired or have already accepted, you know what, like I'm done with this rat race, right? Like, so I'm gonna take you under my wing, or I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna teach you all the secrets. I'm gonna teach you all the backdoor, all the tricks, the unwritten rules that every company has or every organization has. I'm gonna show you how to navigate this organization, right? I think that should be institutionalized in the form of organizations like CAPE. There's this term ERG, employee resource groups, that are all over America now, right? Like these employee resource groups, I think, have the opportunity to institutionalize some of this mentorship and kind of break this prisoner's dilemma, which is like, look, we've all got to help each other, right? Like, yeah, you might be right. There might only be one role available for a woman or one role available for Asian American AAPI for the senior management role, but we've all got to fight to help make sure that we are adequately represented, right? And if we find out that a person was passed over because of gender or because of ethnicity, we've got to raise that with the organization. And if the organization doesn't do anything about it, then we've got to use our public podium to make it clear that the organization doesn't really care. Like the organization is just kind of playing lip service to this. And so I think that aside from finding mentors and other female mentors who can show you the ropes, I think part of the way to kind of crack a little bit of this prisoner's dilemma that I talked about is actually institutionalizing it in some type of organization that holds the employer to account. Like, make sure that, hey, look, we're looking at the stats and like, yeah, we got good numbers at the junior level, but what about the mid-level or senior level? Nothing's going on here. When's the next opportunity for someone to get promoted? And why isn't one of our people being considered? And if they're not considered, then or they don't get the job, let's do a full forensic on behalf of our ethnic community to figure out, well, what happened, right? And hold the organization to account. I think that's how you ultimately kind of institute some of this change in the organization.
Very good. Well, Dave, last question for you, and I have one for Patty. Where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing? And also, what other activities are you doing to help further the interests of Asian Americans?
Yeah, so you can find out anything you want about me. I'm pretty transparent online. So you can go to my website, lucrative.com, but it's Liu, lucrative. So play on my name, lucrative.com. So you can check me out there. I'm frankly just trying to help any way I can. I'm so lucky and fortunate at this stage of my career to be able to give back and help the community, and that's what I'm trying to do. There are a couple key ways I'm doing that. One is my wife and I are setting up and have set up scholarships for actually, speaking of Asian American women, focus on Asian American women, helping them in the schools that we graduated from to get, to not have to pay tuition or defer tuition. Second is I firmly believe that we need to establish ourselves as not Asian Americans, but Americans. We cannot be viewed as an other category. And I think a big part of that comes through the media. And so I'm helping producers of Asian American content, Asian American producers in Hollywood, on Broadway, in other areas to try to just get more Asian American faces and Asian American voices in the mainstream media so that, again, we're viewed as just good old-fashioned Americans and not like some niche minority group. And then third, this is why I wrote this book. This book is really an exercise in sharing the tips and tricks that work for me. And I'll be the first to say they work for me. They may not work for you, but my hope is that if you read my book, if you get even like one or two ideas out of it that help in your career, great. Because I really do believe this. I don't think that we can rely on anyone to help us. We are on our own. A lot of the DEI initiatives in corporate America don't include us. They just don't. Because I think partly because of the model minority myth. Like there's a view like, hey, these guys don't need any help, so let's not help them. When there's other groups that need a lot more help than they do, so let's just cross them off the list. So I wrote this book as a little bit of a self-help, like to help people. And like I said, I'm giving 100% of the proceeds to charities, for kids with clefts. I was born with a cleft. As well as Asian American charities that are focused on more Asian American representation and also reducing Asian hate in this country. So those are a couple of ways that I'm trying to, advance the ball here a little bit to help our ethnic community.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I myself am looking forward to buying your book. It is releasing in November. Is that correct?
Yeah, November.
And we can find out all about it. And we can find out all about it on Dave's website. And thank you, Maria, for putting Dave's website one more time in the chat. So everybody be sure to check it out. So Patty, this is your last week with Santa Monica. Any parting words or advice for your fellow AAPI colleagues before you go?
Thank you, Yvonne. And thank you so much, Dave, actually, for being a strong inspiration for us today. The work that CHAP is doing is phenomenal. I would suggest continuing that evolution. I do just disagree a little bit with what Dave just said in the fact that I do think there is strength of belonging, and I do think that both as individuals and as colleagues in the work, that you can leverage the conversation and actually influence some policy changes that need to be made internally. And I put a lot of things in the chat, but I do think it starts with policy from the perspective of DEI or EDI, however you want to share it, and that we need to be mindful that and ask for what we want. I think that's really kind of my goal was is sometimes because we've grown up in a certain way, because we've been told by our parents what to expect, because we've been experiencing a lot of things we not feel as comfortable, maybe challenged by the way in the work to actually be a city and move forward and think about the totality.
Hey, Yvonne, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I said
Okay.
it looks like we lost Patty again. So Patty, if you can still hear us, thank you so much for being here with us. We're gonna miss you. City of Santa Clara is very lucky to have you, and we wish you the best of luck in your future journey. So with that, I want to thank David Liu and Patty Wong for an illuminating conversation today. I know I've learned a ton, and I'm sure all of us have as well. Again, if you haven't already, please be sure to check out Cape SM's SharePoint site for membership and future events. We'll display the website address one more time in the chat. Don't forget to sign up and join us for our next event on October 21st. We'll be reading and discussing George Takei's graphic memoir, which is available for checkout at the Santa Monica Library. So this concludes today's Cape SM event, Q&A discussion with David Liu, Wall Street Warrior. On behalf of Cape SM, we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you for the privilege of your time. We hope to see you at our next event. Bye now.
Bye.